Hey, I need you to imagine something for about 10 seconds. Your boat goes down, and you wash up on a small, uninhabited island. There's enough food and water, and you survive. You have kids, they have their own, and nobody ever leaves. Fast forward 200,000 years to your descendants, people who have never once touched the outside world. Picture them for a second. What have they turned into? If your gut says, pretty much the same, still just people, still look like me, that's the natural answer, and it's the one almost everyone gives. And it's wrong. 200,000 years on an island wouldn't leave you the same. It would quietly rebuild you into something you'd barely recognize as your own kin. And the wildest part is that we roughly know into what, because this has already happened to humans, more than once. We've pulled the bodies out of caves. But we'll get back to you later. Let's start with the animals. The thing is, there's one strange, almost ruthless rule that everything in the world obeys, from elephants to lizards, and you're no exception to it. So first we'll look at what the island does to different creatures, and at the end we'll come back to you. And watch to the end, because on one of these islands there's a legend about small, hairy things that lived in caves and stole children. Most people call it a myth, but there are real arguments that it's no legend at all. Okay, the rule. Back in 1964, a biologist named J. Bristol Foster compared more than 100 island species with their mainland relatives and noticed something strange. Once a species gets stranded on an island, its body size starts sliding in a predictable direction. And which direction depends on one thing: how big it was when it got there. And you can see it clearest in two creatures that went opposite ways. Picture an elephant you could look in the eye while standing, about a meter at the shoulder. That was a real animal. On Mediterranean islands like Sicily, elephants shrank to the size of a big dog or a pony. And the same thing happened independently to a dwarf stegodon on Flores. The reason's simple. A big body is expensive. It needs a ton of food every single day. On the mainland, that pays off. Nobody messes with something huge. But an island is a cage with a fixed amount of food in it, and there's nowhere to go for more. When the lean season comes, the biggest die first, and the ones who make it and breed are the slightly smaller ones who need less. Repeat that for thousands of generations, and a whole species shrinks down to the size of a pony. On that same Flores, while the elephants were shrinking, the rats were doing the exact opposite. They grew almost to the size of a small dog, and one such species is still alive today. You could go meet it. The logic here is the mirror image. On the mainland, a small animal stays small because everything wants to eat it, and staying small and hidden is how it survives. But on an island, there are almost no predators, and that pressure disappears. Now being bigger pays off. The bigger one defends territory, wins mates, stores more fat for the lean season. And since nothing's hunting it, it can grow in peace. A pigeon on Mauritius pulled the same trick. It ballooned up, forgot how to fly, and became the dodo, a fat, flightless bird the size of a turkey, until humans showed up with dogs and rats and wiped it out within a century. So the island pushes both ways at once. It drags the big ones down and the small ones up, and both ends meet in a comfortable middle. And the smaller and more remote the island, the harsher the effect. It sounds like a nice theory, built on a couple of conveniently chosen examples, which is exactly what scientists argued about for decades, whether the cases had been bent to fit a good story. But in 2021, a team ran more than 1,000 species at once, and the rule held, in mammals, birds, and reptiles. It's a real pattern. And here's the thing to keep in your head as we go. You're a large mammal too. Remember that. We'll come back to you. By now you've caught the pattern, and there's one animal you've probably already got in mind as the perfect example: the Komodo dragon. The biggest lizard on Earth today, up to 3 meters, the weight of a grown man, living on a handful of Indonesian islands, including Flores. Textbook island gigantism, right? A monitor lizard that got stranded and blew up to monster size to hunt those dwarf elephants. Except that's not what happened at all, and this is honestly my favorite part of the whole story. When paleontologists dug through fossil beds in Australia, they found Komodo dragons identical to the living ones, all over the continent and going back millions of years. The dragon didn't grow big on the island at all. It was already a giant on mainland Australia, where it shared the land with an even bigger monitor lizard, a 5-meter monster called Megalania, the largest land lizard in history. The Komodo dragon arrived on Flores already enormous, about 900,000 years ago, and just stayed that way. Before we get to humans, the island reshaped one more thing. And this time, it wasn't a body. This time, it was a whole legend. Remember those dwarf elephant skulls on Sicily and the other Mediterranean islands? Imagine you're an ancient Greek. You've never seen an elephant. Nobody in Greece had. Not until Alexander's armies ran into them centuries later. You're walking along a cliff, and a skull washes out of a cave. It's about twice the size of a human head, and right in the center of the face, where you'd expect a nose, there's one huge hole. That hole is where the trunk attached. But you don't know elephants exist, so what you're looking at is a giant skull with a single enormous eye socket right in the middle of its forehead. In 1914, a paleontologist named Othenio Abel suggested this is where the Cyclops came from, the one-eyed giant Polyphemus that Odysseus blinds in the cave. And it fits almost too well. Sicily has the most of these dwarf elephant skulls, and Sicily is exactly where the Greeks placed the Cyclops. But I'll be honest, plenty of myth scholars consider this a nice story with no real evidence, basically untestable, so file it under maybe. But it points to something real. The island doesn't only reshape the animals living on it, it can plant monsters in the heads of the people who later find their bones. Okay, we've stalled long enough. Back to the boat, the island, and those 200,000 years. What does the rule actually do to you? You're a large mammal, and we just watched what the island does to large mammals. It shrinks them. So the honest answer is that your descendants would most likely get smaller, shorter, lighter, leaner, scaled down to fit an island that can't feed a big, hungry body. And there's a second twist, one that's specific to us. Of every animal on that island, you'd be hauling around the hungriest organ of all. The human brain burns about a fifth of your daily energy just sitting there, thinking about nothing in particular. On the mainland, that price is worth paying. On an island where food is scarce and there's nowhere to go for more, that huge brain is a luxury the lean season punishes hardest. So the island wouldn't just trim your body. It would have every reason to shrink the most expensive thing you own, the very thing you're using to watch this right now. And I'm not guessing. This already happened. On Flores, that same island with the dwarf elephants and the giant rats, they found them. A species of human we now call Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit. An adult stood about a meter tall, and her brain was about a third the size of yours, roughly the size of a grapefruit. And yet, she made stone tools, used fire, and hunted those dwarf elephants, a small body and a small brain running fully human behavior. When the first skeleton was found in a cave in 2003, a lot of scientists said it wasn't a new species at all, just a modern human who was sick, some disease that stunts growth. A reasonable guess. But then they found more of these tiny people at another site on the island and dated them to 700,000 years, including the smallest adult arm bone in the entire human fossil record. 700,000 years. Our species, Homo sapiens, didn't exist anywhere on Earth yet. You can't explain a population of tiny people that ancient with one sick modern human. The island simply made them small. And here's the part worth pausing on. It wasn't a one-off. On a completely different island, Luzon in the Philippines, there's another shrunken human species, Homo luzonensis. Different island, same result. The rule found humans twice and did to us exactly what it did to the elephants. Now, two honest caveats, because this is exactly where it's tempting to overdo it. We're still arguing about why the hobbit's brain in particular got so small. The rule explains the body cleanly, but the brain is messier. And there are hints that our own species, Homo sapiens, shrank on a few islands too. Small-bodied people found on Palau in the Pacific. But that case is genuinely disputed. So the careful version is this. The island would push you toward shrinking. It's already pushed at least two kinds of human that way. You wouldn't be the exception. Which finally brings us to the legend I promised. On Flores, a people called the Nage tell a very old story about a creature called the Ebu Gogo. The name roughly translates to the grandmother who eats anything. They're described as small, about a meter tall, hairy, with long arms and flat, broad faces. They lived in caves. They couldn't make fire and ate their food raw. They'd come out to raid the crops, and the stories say they sometimes stole and ate human children. They muttered among themselves and could repeat human words without understanding them. The legend says that a few hundred years ago, the villagers finally had enough. They lured the Ebu Gogo into a cave with gifts and set it on fire. Most of them died, though a pair may have escaped into the deep forest. And there it is, a meter-tall, hairy, cave-dwelling, fireless, human-like creature on the island of Flores. Sound familiar? An ethnographer named Gregory Forth proposed exactly what you're thinking, that the Ibu Gogo is a folk memory, that early modern humans actually met the hobbits, and the encounter got passed down as a story for thousands of years. I'd love to tell you it's true, but honesty first, most scientists don't buy it. The people who tell the Ibu Gogo story live more than 100 kilometers from the cave where the hobbits were found, across mountains and jungle. Stories about little hairy forest people turn up all over the region, and the hobbits seem to have died out around 50,000 years ago, which is an awfully long time for a memory to survive intact. So it's probably just a legend. Probably. So what would an island make of you? Something smaller and quieter, scaled down to fit, the same way it scaled down the elephants, and at least two kinds of human before you. And here's what I find genuinely beautiful about the island rule. It doesn't breed monsters. It reveals how flexible a body always was. It just turns up the pressure and exposes what was always up for negotiation: how big, how brainy, how costly you can afford to be. The elephant grew huge because the mainland allowed it. The rat stayed small for the same reason. And you're the size you are because your world allowed it too. Move you to an island, and it would quietly rewrite the terms. Thanks for hanging out. The sources are in the description. And remember, ingest as much education as you can in this lifetime. Bye.